Hello, my pleasure seekers, and welcome to today's episode with the beautiful Zach Beach. And I know many of you listeners have been requesting to have a man's opinion on a couple of things love, sex, and relationship related. So I'm super excited to have Zach on today. And yeah, Zach, welcome to today's show. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me, Lucy. It's nice to be here with you today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, darling. Thank you for joining. Who is the beautiful Zach Beach?
Uh, who am I? That to me is one of the most fundamental spiritual questions is who am I or who are you? And I think that's essential to the spiritual path is discovering who we are beyond our body, sense, mind complex. But I know when you ask that question, what does it say on my identity card? What does my website say? So I'm actually from the States. I'm calling in from California. And I do think of all my work in the world as consisting around bringing more love into the world. And I do that in a few fundamental ways. I think of my work as being on the level of the body, the heart, and the mind. So, on the level of the body, I teach yoga and travel doing retreats and trainings and classes and workshops. And I love to tell people every day to open their hearts. And they think I mean, oh, move your shoulders in this way. But what I actually mean is something much deeper. And on the level of the heart, I write poetry and do spoken word. And on the level of the mind, I coach and write and help couples and individuals bring more love into their lives and their relationships.
Wow, I don't even know where to start. Well, thank you for sharing. Um, how did you get into this area of, I suppose, transforming people's relationships, right? Through like their body, mind, and spirit. Would you kind of say that was sort of how you resonate with?
um, a huge theme I've been thinking a lot about lately is just that life is a practice,
Mhm.
that everything that we value in life is a practice. Love, compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, peace of mind, joy, happiness, gratitude, and relationships too are a really incredible practice. So for me, it's all been a practice. And yoga was a huge catalyst for my growth because it did give me something to do every day to calm the mind, to open the heart, to find joy in the body. But it really was my gateway to spirituality and to spiritual practice and to the tools that we can use to deepen our love and connection, to get in touch with this world and this life. And just recently, I had a little light bulb moment along the lines of once we recognize that life is a practice, we can stop judging ourselves so hard for not having it all figured out by now. Like, nothing, we're never going to perfect it. We're never going to have it figured all out. And when you make a mistake, that's part of it. Just like learning a bike, like how to ride a bike. You fall off a bunch of times until you finally are able to coast for longer and longer periods of time.
I think that's such an important point because I think a lot of the personal growth world is around like you're broken, you need to be fixed, you need to become this good,
Mm,
this enlightened soul, right?
it's marketing.
It's marketing, it's sales and marketing. Totally agree. So, how did you come into this way of work? Like, what brought you to where you are now?
I mean, I do think I'm going to keep using this word spirituality, although there can be a lot to be unpacked about it. But I do think spirituality is an iterative process of two steps. One is looking within and reflecting on what truly matters most in this life, on why you are here on this planet, why you were incarnated into this form, if you want to go that far with it. And then the second step is living in line with that value, living in line with what matters. And it's not easy. You might wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to fully love myself today. And then you look in the mirror, and this is it, or your hair looks terrible, and you're like, "Oh man, you're so ugly." And it's rats. I just, I, I tried. I to live in line with what matters didn't quite work out, and that's why it's a process. That's why it's a practice. Coming back to this theme before, so yeah, a long time ago, I did come to the conclusion that love is why we are here on this planet, and that I wanted to devote myself to that. And it's been my own practice. And I also trip and fall and make mistakes along the way because I'm perfectly imperfect, just like you. and everyone listening. And I'm always learning, growing, trying to be better. And working with people is just a really wonderful way to tap into this important part of compassion, which is simply common humanity, recognizing that we're all in this together. And whatever our struggles you are going through, millions of other people have gone through, will go through, and are also going through the same thing. It's easy when we're experiencing our own pain and suffering to be like, "Oh, why me? Why is this happening to me? I'm the only one who's ever feeling this way ever in the in the universe." It's like, guess what? Relationships are hard. Life is hard, and you're not alone in whatever struggles it is that you're going through.
And I think like when you mentioned about like relationships is hard, like why do you think people avoid having relationships then in that case? Because they think they're right? Oh, oh yeah, have I struck a chord?
Oh, no, it's just funny. Um, yeah, vulnerability.
Mm,
That's why, no one wants to be vulnerable. And many of us have had that experience of getting hurt,
mhm,
perhaps by the person that we love the most. And it's normal and natural to want to close off, to build up our armor, to protect ourselves from the world. People do swear off relationships a lot of times in those when they're deep in the weeds and the muck of a transitioning. I don't like to use the term breakup, but transitioning out of a relationship. But the problem with that is that we are wired to love. It is part of our innate nature. We all need social connection, belonging, to be seen, loved, and recognized and accepted for who we are. So whenever I hear anybody that says, I'm done with the relationships, I'm like, let's come back in a week. Or like it doesn't take too long, or like you might be with a friend and they're like, I'm done with the relationships. And then, okay, let's just go to the bar. Let's have a few drinks. Oh, we're talking England. Let's have a pint.
oh
And
God.
and then, somebody starts flirting with them, they kind of start flirting back. And then you're like, oh, there it is.
So good. It's so good. But what do you say to people that, because typically women can, I never want to stereotype, but I know from me and other women that I've spoken to can tend to like take themselves off for like a few months, and really
Mhm.
go inwards and get back to the gym, get their hair done, all the external stuff, right? And typically sometimes a man can go and just sleep with whoever he wants, right? In those kind of
Mm.
circumstances. What is your advice to someone that feels like they're in the situation where they've done all the work on themselves, that they've gone so far about being an avoidant, how to actually get back into opening up their heart? Because the armor is thick. Yeah.
Well, whatever you need to transition and move on is probably, I'll say probably, because there are more toxic like responses to challenges in our life. Um, you don't want to necessarily like numb your emotions with like drugs or alcohol for a few months afterwards, but little big bowl of ice cream and your favorite movie in a row, but like on a Friday night, like that's perfectly acceptable. So some people might just want that intimate connection after a breakup and just want a few flings once they find the freedom of not being in a relationship anymore. Others might need to take 3, 4, 5, 6 months to cool down, because it is important, to realize, to come into a relationship from a place of like fullness and not a desire that someone is out there to complete you or fix you or solve all your problems. So it's super acceptable to want to take 3, 4, 5, 6 months, even a year off, to be comfortable with being alone, so that you don't enter into a new relationship out of desperation or a feeling of lack or incomplete. I like to think of ourselves as filling up our own cup
Mhm.
so that it overflows to the people in our life, not expecting other people to fill up our cup. Now, your question specifically was kind of around You use the term avoidance, and I'm sure you probably know the four attachment styles that we all find ourselves kind of coming in and out of at different times in our life. It's not nearly as set, I think, as a lot of people think. And absolutely, avoiding attachment is a huge one. It's about what 20% of the population tend to have some avoidant tendencies. And there are different strategies to break out of one's avoidance. But the first key is just recognizing that you can't change what you don't know and understand. So the recognition is really the first step. If you don't know what avoidant attachment is, now's a good time to look it up.
Maybe you're avoiding
If
it.
yeah, maybe you've been avoiding learning about avoidant attachment this entire time. um, because there is work to be done in breaking out of those avoidant tendencies. So there's all sorts of different adult attachment interview questions you can find online. A common one like about avoidance is just anything along the lines of, if your partner wants to deepen commitment, do you have an urge to run away?
Mm,
Right. Um, and when your relationship deepens and gets closer, do you have a certain fear, right? That of being hurt and wanting to run away. So it's a level of self-reflection and awareness to see kind of what your own habitual reactions are.
and what would you say then to someone that is, so I'm thinking in my situation, I'm single, but found over the last few years, I've attracted avoidant men. And I know there's that
Mm,
between being an anxious and then attracting an avoidant, or there's the disorganized
mm,
where you're like a bit of both. I'm definitely a bit of both. And I hate labeling. I really don't like labeling, but that is the patterns I've realized. What would you suggest to someone that realizes they attract the same level and they feel like they're doing the work with themselves, but they're still attracting like the avoidant, for example?
mm. I want to get into your question,
What?
but I want to point out a couple things. First of all, you say you hate labeling, and yet you also say I'm single. And
Yeah. Yeah.
single is a label.
Yeah.
And I say that because I do not like this term single,
Oh,
because we our society really views relationships as dual. You either are in one or you aren't in one. You're either single or taken. You're either on the market or off the market.
yeah.
And it ignores, of course, all the relationships that sustain us, that support us day to day. It kind of diminishes friend relationships, family relationships, platonic relationships. And you're not lonely and isolated. We're in a relationship right now. We're having a lovely little conversation and entering into this process of relating with another human being. So I do encourage anyone who says, I'm single, to not discount the relationships that you have with your friends, your family, your communities, your colleagues, your coworkers, and even everyone that you meet in your life. You walk onto the bus, or maybe the tram, you call it there. You walk onto the tram.
Oh my God. It's not I don't think there's a tram. It's a train. Yeah. But that's cool. Sorry, carry
Okay. Or the
on.
lift.
The
Um,
the escalator.
and you say hello to the driver, the bus driver, and like that's a relationship. So we're in a relationship with each other, and also with the world, and we can also cultivate this. Now, your question points into a very common concern, and it's absolutely true. I do hear from women more often than men. I keep attracting emotionally unavailable men. And let's just let go of the like self blame. That's like, why do I keep doing this? There must be something wrong with me. Now, in general, in society, there women do tend to have more anxious attachment. Men do tend to have more avoidant attachment. And a lot of that is just nurture. It's just how we were raised. Men are raised to be more independent. Boys don't cry. They're meant to push down their feelings. Women tend to be put in the role of the caretaker, so they're supposed to take care of others. And if you're in charge of somebody else, a certain level of anxiety can come up. People are, you turn 21, people, when are you going to get married? But you're often defined as like whether or not you're in a relationship, and can define yourself by whether or not you're in a relationship. So women tend to feel a little bit more incomplete. The messages they receive from society tell them they're incomplete unless they've found a man, right? So absolutely, this anxious, avoidant push and pull is extremely common, and there's different ways out of it, but a simple way that I like to begin to talk about it is that love can be boring. And what I mean by that is like, yes, love can be joyous and we can fall in love and just like be skipping down the street, jumping up for the street lamps. But when we talk about a secure, intimate, supportive, and loving relationship, the foundation for that is safety and security. Is just feeling at peace with another person. There's nothing you need to do, change, or improve about yourself, but you're loved and supported exactly as you are. There's nothing to be anxious about. There's nothing to run away from. And the reason that we find ourselves in the same relationship patterns is because that to us is normal.
Yes.
So a negative relationship pattern to us feels comfortable. Somebody, when you meet an emotionally unavailable man or avoidant men, your mind's like, ah, yes, this is what it's supposed to be like.
Really?
And
Yeah.
when you meet another man who's like super secure, they're like, yeah, I love you. I'm not going anywhere. You're like, ugh.
Oh, he's
Like this is part of you that's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you just so so you
100%.
have
Yeah.
yeah, you have to become aware of your, these natural ingrained patterns in order
I
to break free from them.
Oh, this is so funny because this is so relevant. I go through a pattern where I reflect and I'm like, oh my God, that guy was, yeah, I do a runner. I'm like, the guy was secure. And then a few months later, I've just done it. He texts, I've got a runner. I'm like, this isn't for me, whatever. And then a few months later, I'll message them again and be like, hey, sorry about that. And by then it's like too late because it's like 2 months later. And I picked myself up on it yesterday. I was like, I've done that again. It's so funny how the mind pretends that you're not doing the same thing again as well, right? When you're
Mm, mhm.
in and you're like, oh no, it's not the same thing. It's totally different. And then actually it is. Um, so yeah, okay. Thank you for that. And so thanks for the tip.
No
For
problem. Happy to help. That's what I'm here for.
for you, like what do you help couples, and particularly is there like anything common that you feel you see the most that you feel like you like to help and expand people as well?
Mm, I mean, I don't have any specific, maybe specialties, I guess you'll call them. Um, and people do come to couples in particular come to me with all sorts of issues, everything from sex to money to intimacy to communication to we want to up level a relationship and make it even better to our relationship sucks. And we just want to get back to normal, get back to working together. Maybe there's infidelity, maybe there's no sex at all in the relationship, and they want to rekindle the spark. And although every couple thinks their issue is unique, and of course, the individuals in the relationship are beautiful little snowflakes, only existing once and never again in the universe. However, the conflicts that people experience in relationship um, tend to have common themes amongst them. The main one being that we want closeness and connection and emotional intimacy. And although we may think we are arguing, although we may think we are arguing about the dishes or what time we're going to have dinner, it's really those fundamental needs underneath that are the core of the issue. So, even just one of my favorite question prompts is, what is my heart trying to tell your heart? Or, yeah. So it's like, let's get beyond the surface level to tap a little bit into vulnerability and think about, what does my heart want to tell your heart?
And when you ask that, a lot of people, how do people respond? Because that can be quite an intimidating, vulnerable question to ask someone. We don't really ask
Mm.
that on the regular. I don't anyway. Like, do you find there's a level of resistance often when that question arises?
Um, Not at that point, because if a couple comes to me for coaching, for example, they've already made that key crucial step of being willing to do the work. And there's a lot of obstacles like to that. We think if we found the one, if we are in love, everything should be working out perfectly. Um, well, instead of recognizing that intimacy can be worked on and grown and built. So fortunately, if I'm already working with somebody, they're willing to do the work. They tend to be open to certain exercises, communication prompts, and different things like that. And what almost always happens in this particular case is a slowing down.
Mm,
Is it's so easy to be like, oh, you did this and you did this, and I'm so mad at you, and blah 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 blah. And that's the mind. It's going off. And then when you're like, what's your heart say? There's always like, aha.
mm,
What does my heart say right now? And something else I've been thinking a lot about lately is that in Buddhist psychology, there are three paces to life. There's the level of the body, and they would use the term feelings, but I'll just use heart, and then the mind. So what I mean by that is you might wake up in the morning and think, I have 50 things to do today, and there's absolutely no time to do it. Okay, this is the pace of your mind trying to cope with the pace of your body, because your body can only do things you only so fast, right? Like you can only run a kilometer so fast. So too, your mind is much, much faster than your body. And that's where anxiety can come up when you feel like, okay, my mind is going way too fast for my body to keep up with. And that's where slowing down, meditation, tai chi, yoga, etc can be really helpful to bring the mind down to the body's general pace of life. But in between that is the level of the heart, which is again much slower than the body. I mean, sorry, slower than the mind, but a little faster perhaps in the body. But the point is, it takes time to get in touch with our feelings, for feelings to run through us. And if we want to get in touch with our emotional reality, we do have to slow down, and it's really hard to listen to the heart. Sometimes the mind is like a speaker. It's like always endlessly doing its thing. It's impossible to listen to the whispers of the heart if there's just like so much static in the radio of the mind. So you have to turn down the internal static, have to calm the mind in order to get in touch with the nature of the heart.
and for a lot of people that listen to the term slow down, there's often a lot of resistance, right? People are like, what do I do in this situation? And for someone, say they're in like a burnout pattern, so if they've got this level of anxiety going on, how do you recommend that they start turning down the dial? For like Tai Chi or yoga, that could sound quite a lot, quite intimidating. Like, is there any steps you'd recommend before getting to that point? If you're on real overdrive, for example.
Yeah, I mean, a level of acceptance is important.
Mm.
I think we in general blame individuals on what are really societal failures. Like we live in an increasingly fast-paced world, and it embraces the hustle and the grind. And it's easy to have this feeling like if I'm not like working really hard and hustling right now, I'm falling behind. Right. So it's normal. And it all begins with baby steps, small steps. So don't even think about even sitting for like half an hour in meditation. Think about tasting what you are eating. Think
Mm.
about think about 3 deep breaths, right? Even nowadays, you sit down with a meal, maybe you have your phone, maybe you have your television in front of you, maybe even you're speaking with a friend, but you're like scarfing it down. And it's like, how was the meal? And you're like, what meal? You didn't even taste it. So savoring, is a really wonderful way of becoming present, is a really wonderful way of slowing down. And if you begin with something that you enjoy, you're much more likely to continue it. Right. So if you do something pleasurable that you like savoring a delicious piece of chocolate, then you're much more likely to continue your practice of savoring with other areas of your life as well.
I love that. That's such good advice. Like, I think everything is so pleasurable. It's the most simplest of pleasures. Is something you can enjoy, you know? Um,
Mhm.
and as you know, the show is a lot about like sex and relationships. And so for you, where do you advise or support couples that are in infidelity, like you mentioned, you know, because there's that real level of trust that potentially has gone. And how do you help couples in that position?
Mm. Ah, yes.
Your face is like, oh, okay. Oh dear.
Well, um, hmm, the cultural perspective on infidelity is very slowly shifting. It's like turning around a giant ship. Um, a a few decades ago, infidelity was the worst possible thing that could ever happen to somebody. It was the worst thing that you could ever do to somebody. I even remember my coworker, I think he was in his 60s, and he was telling me about his recent divorce. And he was like, "Yeah, we were married for 30 years, had a house, bunch of kids, but I had to end it." And I was like, "Oh, wow. What happened?" And he said, "Well, she cheated on me." And to him, it was the clearest, most straightforward, like given that this is something that had to happen. Right. Um, there are even like really um I'll just use the term misogynistic men out there who are like, if you're in an abusive relationship, you should stay in it and endure it. But cheating, that's the line. Like
Oh my
it's a,
God.
it's a super like distorted, like the worst perspective. But even in like really right wing Christian churches, for example, um back in the day, it's not too long ago, the only reason you could ever have to divorce was through infidelity.
Mhm.
Like there was you had no other recourse. Like you went to the priest and you're like, this happened. Like, oh, well, God, God brought you two together. And then, but you were like infidelity. Oh, that's in the commandments. Okay,
Off you go, cheat on your wife or husband.
so, anyways, but we're slowly shifting to recognizing that infidelity is something that occasionally happens in relationships, that it doesn't necessarily mean the total end, an immediate end of the relationship, but it can be an event that can be probed,
Mhm.
that can be looked into, just discover why it happened, how it happened, and a deep learning process can be initiated that results with the relationship continuing and being stronger than ever before. Now, that probing and investigation might mean the relationship also ends, but it can end in a more amicable and copacetic way rather than a deep sense of pain and resentment. Fundamentally, all infidelity is, and again, I respect if you're in the previous, it's the worst possible thing that could ever happen to a relationship. But all infidelity is it's a breaking of an agreement. You agreed not to do something, and you did it. Now, have you ever agreed? Uh, have you ever said you weren't going to do something in your life and then you did it? Like,
It's life.
or the opposite? Have you ever said you were going to do something and then you didn't do it? Oh, I'll see you on Friday at the party. Friday comes around. I don't want to go. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, um, and it does come with the sort of greater acceptance of what you might call alternative relationship styles, polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, swinging, whatever paradigm you want to call it. But the point is, you can heal. There's a possibility of growth if both partners are willing to do the necessary work of rebuilding trust. And it's not necessarily the worst possible thing that uh, means the immediate end of your relationship.
And I think that's such a good point. Like it can almost open couples up to actually do the work together.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And so what is your viewpoint then on polyamory, open relationships, every other label? There on that genre.
It's so interesting. I'm in California, right? There's like a joke, like you could throw a dildo out a window and hit a sex party. And it's like the version of throw a rock out a window. So I wrote this book it's called The Seven Lessons of Love. And there were just a few paragraphs in it along the lines of like, we live in a very individualistic society. Monogamy is individualism times two, because you're still like, as your family unit, as a nuclear family, a separate and isolated unit. And we have forgotten about extended families and extended communities, and other relationship styles could potentially work out better for you.
Mhm.
And when I published that, I realized that I was now in a camp in a certain segment of society, because there are some people who say monogamy is the absolute best institution ever created by man. It is the cornerstone of civilization. And if you question it, you are a blasphemous heretic, and I won't listen to anything that you've ever said. So, there's this one, I have this like Amazon review who's like, oh yeah, I really loved the book until I got to the author's views on monogamy.
Oh.
Because I said so, like, didn't matter like anything I said before, after, etc., is, and then people be like, and so if you're talking about like Esther Perel, like the one of the main thought leaders behind infidelity, people are like, oh, it reminds me of so and so who also believes this. I'm like, so I'm in the camp. So I admit it, I'm in the camp. I believe that there are other ways of relating in this world beyond the simple monogamous paradigm that we are taught. And it might work better for you and your heart's desires and your dreams and how you want to live your life. Whether it's open relationships, polyamory, swinging, people come into it not just because they want to have sex or intimate relationships with other people, but people come into these relationship styles for political reasons, for spiritual reasons, for um, activistic, if that's the word, as part of their activism of like just bringing more love to more people and promoting a radical idea of love, and to break out of the bonds of patriarchal, misogynistic bondages that used to view marriage not as an institution of love, but a way of owning women, which is what it used to be. Also, a few centuries ago, marriage had nothing to do with love, but was simply um, a man's way of becoming an owner of his wife. Um, so they're perfectly valid, but it's important to recognize how much more challenging it can be.
Yeah.
And I say that because there's another therapist I love, and he says that like polyamory is the PhD of relationships, in terms
Ooh.
of like the skills that you need in order to maintain multiple intimate relationships at once. I don't know if it's the PhD, but I just do know we live in a very monogamy centric world where you don't have the models or examples. Just you absorb through osmosis, through watching television and movies and things. There's no real examples
Mhm.
of communication styles and relationship styles that you can use as guideposts as you kind of navigate these waters. And we also don't live in a society that values love, that it teaches us about love, let alone teaches us something like pleasure-based sex education. Um, so, and I say that because for a lot of people, they say something like polyamory for me was 100 times easier than monogamy. Because it's just their natural way of operating in this world, that the shift suddenly became a lot easier once they stopped having to hide their desires, once they got confused when they were with their partner and they expressed attraction for somebody else. They were confused about why their partner was so mad at them. Like, it can be easier because it's living more in line with your truth, but it's also a lot harder because there are absolutely skills you want to develop beforehand and while you're doing it.
I think that is so important, the skills. Like I been through a phase the last 2 years, so I've been in a few open relationships and I went to I think
Mm,
to a big thing about communication. And there was one guy and he was so great. He had 3 different women. We all knew of each other and he was with
mhm,
us and his communication was amazing. And
mm.
and then I went and dated a guy who was very monogamous, and his communication was shocking. And I think that is like a bit that people don't talk about enough. Like it doesn't matter on the circumstances, it matters on your communication and who you are. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people have this great idea of like, ooh, swinging is great, or like what I'm gonna do, but not tell anyone. But then when it comes to it, they don't know how to manage it in a relationship. Would you agree?
I have
Like,
well, that's the thing, like, I recommend any relationship at least have that conversation. A lot of people choose monogamy by default, and
yes.
they also don't even define what monogamy means, what the boundaries are around, say, emotional or physical intimacy with other people. And because it's like the default and it's never talked about, you never gain that skill of talking about what these words like infidelity, cheating, commitment, freedom, connection, emotional infidelity, physical infidelity. You never talk about what these words mean to you. And absolutely, if you go to, a poly person, or I'm even going to say a kink person, if they're good at what they do, they will be extremely adept at the communication skills around desires, around consent, around maximizing the needs of everyone involved, which is what an agreement is defined as really in the poly world. Now, that being said, these are all generalizations. I've met poly people who are terrible at communicating and monogamous people who are fantastic at communicating. So obviously it depends person by person.
Mhm. And is there any advice you'd give to someone that is listening to this and say they've been in like a 10-year marriage, right? And they have never had this conversation with their other half about their preferences. Like, where would you start to have this conversation? Because your partner might not have any idea this is, like you said, we're not trained to this. There's no leader or mentor often to guide us on how to do this. Like, what advice would you give to start that conversation?
You mean preferences are around alternate ways of relating?
Yeah, exactly. But also, um, how to do it in a kind way where it doesn't look like they're about to cheat, because you can imagine the other partner never had this conversation. The go-to thing might be, I'm not satisfying them, all this stuff will come up. So how like
Yes.
gently bring this about? You can't just spring it on at the pub as an English.
Yes. 10 years into your relationship, when you're sitting on the couch, is not a good time to say, honey, I think we should open our relationship. Mostly because, like, a vast majority of the time, it just backfires. Um, where, like, honey, I want to open a relation. Most people want to open the relationship for themselves, but not for the other person. So you're like, honey, I think we should open a relationship. And they're like, oh my God, really? Awesome. Because there's this cute coworker I had. I'd love to reach out to them. Maybe we could go on a date on Friday. And you're like, whoa, wait a second. Hold on. The jealousy coming. um, So obviously the way forward is small, the way forward is slow. And a really great way to test the waters is just with your mind. So what I mean by that is when you're watching a movie together, express see what it's like to express attraction
Oh, okay, yeah.
to like the person on the television show that you're watching. Right. Don't like trap your partner. Like, do you think my best friend is more attractive than me? No, 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 no. Just be like, I think that person's cute. Do you think that they're cute? Right. Test the waters along the lines of beginning to express potential sexual or romantic desire for other people, celebrities, people on television, not necessarily anybody's best friend. Um, and you can also even just play with those fantasies with your mind too, right? Like even when you're making love, you could be like, don't you wish like so and so was with us right now? Wouldn't that be so hot? Or something like that, right? Um, and then test your feelings as you begin to think about that, because yeah, a lot of people have never even expressed um, attraction to other people in a monogamous relationship, because there is almost like if it's not spoken, then doesn't exist. All right. A lot of people think if you are truly in love with your partner, that your attraction for other people will just disappear. And they don't like busting that myth by expressing it with another person. And I'll just again reiterate that really the foundation for a romantic and intimate relationship is safety and security. So even when you do begin to have these conversations, um, express your love and commitment for your partner. There's and you can also start like watching more like more sexy movies, I want to say, because maybe in Europe, like movies are like living in the States, like our attitudes towards violence and sexuality are flipped. Right? I can watch some movie and see like 100 guys get their head blown off, but you show one nipple,
Oh my
suddenly people like, oh, good lord. But what I mean by that, there's this lovely little movie in the States called Short Bus, and there's this line in there because they were at a sex party and they go, voyeurism is participation, you know. And that's actually a wonderful way too to test the waters, is you can stay monogamous and like go to a sex party and see what it's like to watch other people have sex, to see what it's like watching having people watch you have sex. Right? You can flirt with other people, have those agreements beforehand that you're not going to physically engage with other people, but see what it's like to flirt with other people and to see your partner flirt with other people, because it can be really erotic and awesome. Like there are couples out there who go out, they flirt with other people, it makes them really excited, and then they go home and they have the best lovemaking they have with each other, right? So that could mean watching sexy movies, watching porn, going to sex parties, but remaining in your commitments, which is why it's important just to recognize, yeah, monogamy is a spectrum, I say, and you can decide where you want to be in that spectrum.
I love that. And I think then, what would your advice be though, if two single people meet at a swingers party and that's how their relationship is built on? Because I think it's really important, like you said, to have safety and security from the get-go. And we often think people have been together for a period of time that then venture out. But what about people that meet in these communities and then decide? Do you think that's a good base or stable place to build a relationship from? That's an interesting.
Sure.
You think? I hope.
It's totally any I'll just say, first of all, anything is possible.
So true. Yes.
Now, when people do think about, one of the reasons people think monogamy is so successful is that opening the door to sexual and intimate relationships with other people is a danger to the central primary partnership. And as a result, there is an inclination to certain strategies
Mm,
to prevent that from happening. So a lot of people think, okay, I do want to be open, but I want to create a foundation first with my partner. So if I do meet somebody new, we should agree to 1, 2, or 3 years of monogamy to focus on our partnership and then explore things with other people. And first, I'll say that's perfectly valid. Like, you want to try that approach, go for it. And there's a good chance it could work out. However, if it's based on fear, if it's based on trying to protect, if it's based on this idea that that's the only way to do it, then you might be getting yourself in some trouble there. Because guess what? Infidelity can happen in monogamous relationships, and it can mean the end of that. And infidelity can happen in open, poly, and swinging relationships too. Because as we mentioned, infidelity is a breaking of agreements.
Mm.
And you can have all sorts of agreements in your poly partnerships, particularly around, say, like safe sex boundaries is one of the most common boundaries that gets crossed in open relating. So having those communication skills, that emotional awareness, and making sure you're coming into it from the right way. You could meet your partner anywhere. You could meet them at on a blind date. You could meet them in the middle of an orgy. Who knows what's going to happen?
Imagine telling that to your
Anything's
parents. We
possible.
met. Imagine telling that to your parents. We met in an orgy.
Well,
To be fair, your parents might be like, great, so did we.
just say party. Just say, oh, yeah, yeah, exactly. That could really open up some
It runs in
lovely dialogue there.
the family. So did your grandparents. You'd be like, Jesus. Oh my God. Thank you so much for sharing and being so open about all of these topics. I really, really, really appreciate it. One question I always like to ask my guests is, what is your favorite pleasure in life that you like to do?
I don't think I have a favorite pleasure because there's so many things to enjoy about this miracle of life that we are in. Lately, my favorite thing has really been tea, believe it or not, TEA. We mentioned this before the show, and you're like, I'm from England, I get it. And um, the simplicity of it all just brings so much joy. Because I do think we're told and believe that in order to be happy, we need a certain material wealth. We need to accumulate as many things as possible. And whenever I drink tea, I'm like, this is the two most abundant things in this world. All you need is water and leaves.
And
That's all it takes. And water and leaves makes me so happy. Just sitting, watching the water warm, feeling the warm cup in my hands, watching if you get like a nice oolong or a really nice kind of rolled leaf that then just blooms open in your cup of water, just watching it and then tasting it. I had one teacher who described tea as drinking nature straight from the bottle. And I just love that so much. And the elegant simplicity of it all brings a lot of joy to me.
I love that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, honey. It's been a pleasure to have you on today, Zach. And for anyone looking to follow your journey, reach out or work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, just thank you so much, Lucy, for having me on. I really appreciate all your lovely questions and your energy. And it's wonderful to connect my heart to yours across the beautiful ocean between us. And my name is Zach Beach, super easy to find. You can go to zachbeach.com and find me on Zach Beach Love on social media.
Amazing. Thank you so much, honey. I'll put that all in the show notes for everyone. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Take care.